Before we jump into Max, I just want to show you guys something else pretty quickly. I want to show you guys the dome, and that is simply, if we go into, and you can see how actually sloppy this is. I would not do this if this wasn't so far away. It's really soft and blurred out. There's distortion, things like that, but it's fine because it's further away and we're not going to be able to see it. So I pick a kind of a tileable brick texture. I do the same things where I use the discoloration maps, low contrast, add some more dirt and grime to it, bring it into here, and it's just a cylindrical map here. Create UVs, cylindrical map, and you can see it in the UV texture editor. I've moved it and I've scaled it up so that the sizing matches the scale. It's because if I made this smaller, the bricks get bigger, and I don't want the brick to be that big because of the sheer size of this thing, and I want this to be on the lower side. And you can see how quick and dirty that is. I mean, that I would never really do something like that unless it was going to be shown at this distance and, you know, barely visible at this height. So just a quick little thing there. And this guy here, again, it's just a cylindrical map, and the base texture is applied to it. And if we go into our UV texture editor, we can start, grab those UVs and bring it to the top there, and need to be scaled up. We can either go in and clean that up, or because this is again behind a lot of stuff, we can probably get away with leaving that just the way it is, like that. We have the streaks coming down, and once you put everything on top of it, I mean, you barely see it, you know. And these guys here will be doing the same thing, cylindrical mapped, the base applied to it. All these little details, I would just group them all, combine them, and throw an automatic UV. Because they're so tiny, we don't really care what it is, unless we just care about it having color. That's it. That's the only thing I'm concerned about. So you could, this is all, get rid of those, have just the middle parts there, go to mesh, combine all those tiny little pieces together, and then create automatic mapping. And assign existing. Come on. It doesn't want to show up. Trim. If you want it white, if you want it red, you could put it the other color, but I mean, that's all it would need. And the same goes for all this stuff, you know, same procedure going all the way up, keeping it nice and simple. Alright, let's jump into Photoshop real quick. I also want to show you guys the other textures that are being used. So this is the dome. Again, pretty simple. I literally took this off another dome that I saw, but I like the pattern. That's why it's really blurry and dirty. I would try to look for a higher res image to get a higher level of detail in here without softness, but again, this is just me being lazy, and it works, and I get away with it, so why not? But just be careful. That's all I'm saying. So that's the one we created, and these are some other ones that I used. Different kind of designs here, just combine the same different techniques that we had, that we used for the other guys. Same thing here, combining several different ones, and you can see how dirty it is. This is not clean at all, but again, I'll show you how well it actually works. You'd be surprised. These two pulled off right from really the reference images that we looked at. It's this one. Where'd it go? Yeah, this guy right here. So again, using that same photographic texture, bringing it in, making it look realistic, and we put it in here, and we just move our UVs into the space like we did. Here's some textures for the boats that are in the scene, and again, they're done the exact same way, just laid out like this, and then the UVs moved to match this. They're just unwrapped, using box mapping too, as we'll jump into Max and I'll show you real quick, but I just wanted to walk you through. Nothing special here, guys. This is basic texturing 101, and you can see how quick and dirty it is, and it works. Again, these are pretty small in our shot, tiny at that level of light with the atmosphere. This is all you'll need to make this thing convincing. Varying the color, so we can use the same texture, vary the color, and we have all of a sudden we have 3 or 4 different boats without changing the model. Here is the texture for the taller structures, again using the same exact techniques. You can see the wall background repeating through all of these. Some trim details that you pull off of different photos and brought in here and laid out, and I move it around. If I need to come back here and adjust things like we did last time, I'll do it to make it fit right. And we had that being a little closer in camera, so that might take a little bit more fudging than the other ones. Let me just close these guys up. This is for the tall buildings that were duplicated 3 times. Same thing that we saw. Just closing these up. And here it is. I mean, you saw those quick and dirty textures, and when you put it together, now of course you see there's definitely some cleanup that needs to be done, and this may have been too sloppy. I may have to go in and move some stuff around, but for the most part, this works. This is the exact same textures that we just saw, put on the exact same way, mapping methods. You can see the trim here, the same texture that we just used on different style buildings, the same kind of detailing that we grabbed, the same dome. Nothing special really happening here than what we saw. But when it comes all together like this, it starts to work. This is even the massing and the grouping of these shapes was based off of one of the reference photos that we took a look at. So nothing special happening, and we changed the textures around a little to make it look a little different. And of course this needs some cleanup. And when that comes all together, you can see for the final image, low level of light, there's fog, there's trees breaking up that repetition so we don't see it repeating exactly the same way. And this is this kind of stuff that you need to think about, so that you're not spending days texturing this stuff when it's going to be covered and you're not going to see it, or it's dark and we're not really making out the texture perfectly. So you want to manage your time appropriately for what you're going to see through the camera. So make those kind of decisions knowing what the final is going to look like. So yeah, all this stuff coming together with a little bit of paint here and there. We'll jump into that a little bit later, but that's all it takes to get an image looking like this. Nothing too special. Let's jump into Max now and take a look at a different texturing method. Alright, so here we are in Max, and I'm going to show you the setup in Max. If you are using Max, it's a little different than what we did in Maya, but still pretty good. So let's check it out. This is going to be rendering using V-Ray. So let's jump in here and close that. Keep this down here. So we've already box mapped this at the top here, so I'm going to show you guys how to do the bottom. And so it's just throwing a UV map modifier on it and clicking box mapping. And if you want, you could also click fit, so it fits the whole thing here. Now the shader part is where we're going to do some work. So this is currently applied to it, but we want to change this to be a V-Ray material. So V-Ray material, and here's the tricky part of it. So in the diffuse channel, diffuse channel, we're going to throw, instead of regularly, we would just throw a bitmap, which would be your JPEG that you want to apply to this, your texture. We're going to do a composite shader. And in the composite shader, what this is going to allow us to do is create several different layers that could then be stacked on top of each other on this same model. So for the first guy, we'll pick bitmap this time because we want to look for a JPEG. And we're going to go through our desktop here and grab our base texture. And we don't want it to be tiled, so I'm going to turn the tiling off. And this is an important thing to note here, the map channel. So as we add different layers of texture, we're going to keep changing the map channel. So this being 1, and the next one we add will be 2. And this slot here, we can load the alpha if we have one. So we have that. This will correspond, this UV map is going to correspond with this map channel. So UV map 1, this is on map channel 1, corresponds to this map channel being 1 as well. So let's apply this to our guy here. And let's preview that map so we can see it here. And you can see it's a little bit off. So what we need to do, I'm going to hit the plus sign here, grab the gizmo, and the gizmo will allow me to interactively move and scale my texture. So instead of doing it in the UV texture editor like we did in Maya, we get to do it interactively here in Max. So I pull this up here, do a quick little render, and we have our texture. Pretty fast, pretty easy. This is cheap, it's clean. Well, not super clean, but clean enough to get us results. Box mapping is very handy. Alright, now let's see if we can add some more details. So I'm going to run through this and say I want to add some trims and cool little details here. So I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to throw a bitmap in here again. And this time we're going to find our guy here. So if we view our image, this is the same texture that we used in Maya. But this time, and this is a cool little nifty thing in Max, is if I view my image, I can select the crop area. So without moving UVs, I can tell the shader to only use this area. And let me make it bigger here. Only use this section. Make that smaller. You can tighten that up a little bit. That's good enough for now. So if I set that region, now I have to say apply. So this is the cropping and placement. So now I've cropped that texture to only be here. And that's why it's important to have, again, your texture being at 3 or 4K, is because when you crop it down to that small, you still want to have that high resolution. Whereas if it was only 1K and you zoomed in, it's going to be really blurry because it's really cropping in. So we've cropped it, we pressed apply. We want to turn off our tiling, and our map channel we're going to set to 2, because now this is the second layer of the stack. So again, our map channel, composite, and we have 2 different layers. So now I can select this face only and go up and hit UV map and do a planar map this time. And the planar map, I want it to be we've got to find our axis. I believe it's in the x-axis. We can fit it. We can also manipulate it through the gizmo because it's rotated a little bit because we rotated our model and it's messed up the coordinate system. But no biggie. We can rotate it. Oops. Let's just say that's fine. And now in this UV map, we're going to set the map channel to 2. So now it's going to read from here. Hopefully. Let's see. If all goes well, we should see our texture there. There it is. And of course it's big and insane. So what we could do is go into our gizmo and scale it down. We can move it. And it'd be good to see, and I'll show you guys how we can do that too. Click render real quick. And you can see how we can start adding layers and layers of detail. Now of course this needs fine-tuning. And to do that without pressing render, what V-Ray has is V-Ray RT. So you would have to go into your render settings. Click active shade here. And go to assign renderer. Your production render you can change to V-Ray RT, which stands for real time. And your active shade is now set to V-Ray RT as well. So if you click, go into our camera view and click active shade, what it's going to do is start calculating it. You can see it's pretty dark, and that's why we have this light here to brighten it up. I'm not sure why it's going crazy over here. And the faster your computer is, the better this thing is going to turn out. Of course, my machine isn't the best in the world, but so it takes time to render it. But you can move it and you can see it faster if you have a good machine. That way you can move it and still see it in real time. Since my machine is crap, I'm going to close this up, put it in production mode, change my renderer back to V-Ray Advanced, and just render the good old-fashioned way. Oh, of course, now it's messed up. It changes your render settings, so you're going to have to go back, use the frame buffer, turn on GI, and you're good to go. So the advantage of doing it that way is that we can add layers and layers and layers of details and trims and all kinds of things and have it controlled all on the model instead of going back and forth into Photoshop and moving it around to have it land in the right place. We can move those trims separately and have it come out exactly the way we want. Sorry, the settings on this were way too high, causing long render times. So yeah, so that's the advantage of doing it this way. It's quick, it's easy, and you can really move it around and customize it to what you need to do. Now we did this quick and sloppy, but you can see how powerful it can be when it's used when it's used properly. So I'm going to cancel that and set a render region area of just there. And let's jump into this. We can scale it down because it's too fat right now. Let's render just that area. Move it down. So this is the advantage of having the RT. We don't need to keep pressing render all the time. But you can see how simple it is now to move things around and add details anywhere you need to add it. And then we can have one for the door. We can have window things on the side. And it's just, if you want to, you can separate out your pieces in your geo, or you can select your faces and then click UV map again and keep adding, you know, layers and layers and layers and layers of different textures all here, all controlled by alpha channels and driven by map channels here. Go as high as you like. I think it stops at like 99 or something. So that is one way to do it in Max, and it's a really good way. It's fast and easy. And the only difference is that you might have to create alphas for your textures sometimes, or just keep cropping your thing here. So I can move it and put it here. Click render. We're gonna get something totally different. So real powerful. Send this to local. We can increase the size here. Let's see what, oh, different view. Make sure you're in camera view. You know, really start getting it to work for you. All right, quick little breakdown of how it's done in Max, and let's jump to the next step. All right, so let's talk about how we can use trees in our scene. The main reason I like to put trees into any shot, or this shot specifically, is that what it does for me is it helps to break up a lot of that architecture, the hard surfaces, by implementing more of an organic, natural element into the scene. And it helps with breakup, it helps to bring a little bit more life into the scene, and just acts as a really nice visual element to create interest in the shot. Now, why I did it in 3D versus just grabbing a photo or painting it by hand is because I can get the lighting for free. And the lighting is where we're really going to push the realism. You saw that we weren't really too detailed in the modeling. We're also not going to get too crazy with the trees. And the reason is, usually the main cue to make something look realistic is the lighting and the exposure. When those things click, it just gives that sense of realism right away. And that's why when you look at really loose paintings, concept sketches or something, but the lighting and the exposure and just, you know, the values and color and atmosphere are just spot on, and it looks really real, you kind of, your brain kind of dismisses the sketchy painterly look, because the values, the color, the lighting, atmosphere, everything is just done really well. So we can get away with not modeling every single little detail. We can get away with not having photoreal trees for now, if our values and our lighting are right. So this is going to give me a basis for that lighting, getting some realistic lighting cohesive to the entire scene, as everything in the scene is lit by the same light in our 3D scene. So that's the main reason. And when you do have a collection of trees that you've just collected, it's really just easy. Just you import it, you know, all the textures are already set up. You throw it in your scene, render, and it's good to go. As opposed to looking for that reference of a tree, then color correcting it, and you know, trying to make it work into your scene, relighting it. It's just super easy to get this going. And of course, we're gonna paint on top of this. We're gonna jump into that part at the end of all the lessons where we comp all our stuff together in Photoshop. But let's talk about these trees right here. So here's a render of the trees that we have in our scene. Again, not photoreal trees. This one is more stylized. This one has been modeled by hand. That's why it has more of a stylized design. But these guys right here, the cypress trees, these are Italian cypress trees, and where I got them, I use a package called Xfrog, and Xfrog Plants has a whole library of trees, bushes, plants, flowers, all kinds of stuff. As you can see right here, the whole family, the whole collection, the whole gallery. It's an investment that I made because I tend to use a lot of trees and plants regularly in your scenes. It's good to make the investment to throw it in because you keep it and it's just super fast. If you're doing freelance work or just personal projects, nothing beats it. So here's the Italian cypress that I'm using, and you can see that they sell it separately on TurboSquid as well. So if you visit that page, you'll see it's here $24.50 for the set. I'm not sure how many comes in it, but anyway, that's where you get them from, Xfrog, the tree library, and you can invest in it or download them one by one or just search for free models. You can see a ton of stuff in here, and I've used it a lot, so it's really helped me out. That's where these guys came from. Now, the textures I change up because sometimes I don't like the ones that come with them, and I change them up myself. This guy back here was modeled and sculpted in ZBrush, just the bark there to get this stylized shape, and the leaves up here were taken from another tree from Xfrog and brought in and duplicated several times with different shaders and textures. And let's jump into see what this is made of here. So one thing that you'll see that makes trees look fake right away is that everything is one color and texture. So what I like to do is, and I use V-Ray to render. If you're not familiar with V-Ray, I'm not going to get too in depth, but I just want you guys to understand the methodology and the thinking behind it and apply it to any renderer that you use. It doesn't have to be V-Ray at all, but the technique and the thinking behind it is what's important. So, and I use Max because it has a lot of little features and plugins here that Maya doesn't have, which is really handy. And we're going to jump into that in a second. So the way I like to set up the shader for this guy is, so we have one, and this stuff gets pretty heavy really quickly because there's a lot of leaves. So this is what I essentially extract from an Xfrog tree. It's just the top, no bark, and I duplicate it around several times to get a big canopy. These are all duplicates instanced around. So I'll grab that, and when you bring it in from Xfrog, these are already UV'd and they come with shaders, which is good because they'll break it down into your bark and your leaves, and all you got to do if you want is to plug in your own textures and you're good to go. So that part is already done for you as well. But what I like to do is I throw on this thing in Max called Material by Element. And what it's doing is it's telling you, or it's giving you an option of how many IDs do you want to include on this? And IDs meaning how many different shaders do you want it to read from? And I said I wanted 3. So, and the reason I picked that is if we jump into Photoshop here real quick, these are the leaves that I use. The alpha for the cutout of the cards, and then various colors and tints and variations of that same leaf. Because the tree, if you look at a tree, it's got tons of different colors and changes, subtle variations, and that's the same thing we want to duplicate and mimic into our own. So I have variations of the same leaf, and these textures you can grab them from CG Textures. So you could go into their textures, wood, tree, bark right here, and pick out the type of bark you want. Make sure it's tileable, that way it can repeat without having seams. Or you can go into branches or leaves here and grab any kind of leaf. This is the one I believe I used, and it comes with its own alpha, which is great. And then you bring it into Photoshop, and you can shift your color, make it brown, yellow, green, whatever you want, just to get a variation. And tip here, whenever you download a file from CG Textures, it's going to come with an alpha. Don't ever put it on black or white, because the way the subpixel mapping works is that it's going to grab 1 pixel off that edge. So if your background is black, it's going to give you a black edge around it, and that's not what you want. So always sample an average color off of your texture and fill in the background and flatten it out. That way that 1 pixel is going to have the same color or average color of the leaf itself. And we have our alpha there. So we're going to jump in back into Max. Let's get rid of this guy. So I have 3 different versions, and for me, I like to create V-Ray materials, and it's a pretty simple V-Ray shader with a diffuse plugged in. This is the first texture, ID number 1. And it's got the alpha mapped in here, right here. Nothing too crazy so far, and a tiny bit of reflection. And you change that by clicking the color, black meaning 0 reflection, and you can see a value of 3 for a subtle reflection. You can see in that shader ball here that we have a tiny bit of reflective surfaces, because leaves tend to have a little bit of shine to them. Alright, we're not going to jump in too much into dealing with V-Ray shaders, because that's it could take forever just to talk about every single little thing. But I just want to give you guys the basics here. And so it's pretty much a duplicate, so that's ID number 1. ID number 2 would be the same exact setup, except we're loading texture number 2, 3, wherever we want to go. So if we start out with a green, we may want to go for a more yellow-green, desaturated, and then maybe a little bit of this more brown, dried-up leaf to finish off. So here, same thing. In our diffuse map, we got the more yellow, desaturated value in there, and opacity's piped in with no reflection, actually. Let's see. Yeah, 0 reflection on this. As it gets drier, we're going to have less reflection. So we may not want reflection in that one. And then we'll go for the brown color, just to break it up, or a little more desaturated green, just to get a slight variation. The leaf itself doesn't change. We don't want to change the shape too much. You could if you wanted to, but generally we keep the same leaf and shift the color slightly to get a little bit of that variation. That's what's going to give us that more of a realistic feel to it. So same thing, and now we have IDs here. You see 1, 2, and 3. So that's where this ID count in the material by element comes in. 3 IDs, meaning 3 shaders, and then it says how much of ID number 1 do you want to include. The probability of it showing up, let's say 50%. Material number 2, we'll say 40% probability, and material number 3, 10% probability. So this is great, and it randomizes it, so it's all over the place, which is great. We want that random thing. We don't want it perfectly separated into 3 sections. And that's applied pretty much, the same shader applied to every single canopy here. As you can see, it's been duplicated a number of times. The bark right here, a simple shader again, same thing, nothing too crazy. It's just diffuse mapped. There is no opacity, but there is a bump, and we just took that same color, we desaturated it and threw it into the bump there, just to get a little bit extra. Now, the distance that this tree is going to be in the shot, we're not going to see any bump, but I just threw it in there just for shits and giggles. Alright, so that's that guy over there. I'm going to close this group here. And let's hide this guy. Let's get rid of him. He's heavy. And then the Italian cypress, pretty much the same setup, except we're not varying the colors like we did on that bigger guy. Because this has a simpler canopy, this is how it will come in. So when you import it from Xfrog, you bring in, it's going to break out your shader like this. We have one for the bark color, and these are already set up for you, and leaf color, so you know which is which. And now in the leaf color, I select a V-Ray material. Same thing. And then what I do is pipe in this texture for the Italian cypress. And with its alpha. With a tiny bit of reflection as well. Tiny bit. Nothing too crazy. And for the bark, this is it. And because I found that it was too bright, I threw in a color map here where we can pretty much correct. And this is the powerful thing about Max, is that we can make all these corrections in the shader. So I can, this acts like curves, bringing it down if I think the value of that the bark is too bright. Instead of going to Photoshop, doing another version, grading it down, saving it out, and then loading it again, I can do it right here in the shader and manipulate it in there, which is great. So same thing, it's tileable, so it goes seamlessly. And that's pretty much it. And the same thing here, same texture applied to it, different setup. And we pull up our frame buffer here. We get something that looks like this. Now, the lighting for our scene is going to be different, but it's good to see what it looks like. They're not the best trees you'll find out there. There's other packages like Speed Tree, or the makers of View, Eon, came out with Plant Factory. These are really great programs, just really expensive. They're tree generators, and it's just too expensive to own. That's why I use Xfrog. It's older, but you know, it does the job for me. So, and plus, we're going to be painting on top of this. So if I'm not happy with this texture, I'll go look for an Italian cypress tree photo and just bring in a little bit of photographic elements in here. And I'll show you guys how to do that a little bit later on, but I want to show you guys how the trees were implemented to the scene, the shader setup, and some tricks to add some variation. As you can see, we have that color variation in here, brighter brown, and that's what's going to add to the realism. So that's the technique behind it. Again, we're not going to even be this close to it, so we'll probably be at this distance and it can work for it. And another reason that we're going 3D on these is because I'm going to be setting up street lights, and the street lights are going to be low. They're going to be like street lamps, and they're going to be illuminating these trees, and we get that nice lighting for free. So it's going to light up the leaves, add a beautiful lighting pass that we're going to bring in and control later on when we put our comp together in Photoshop. So a lot of advantages to having 3D trees. The most powerful is that we can light it exactly the way we want. It's cohesive with the lighting of the entire scene, and we can render these separately on a separate layer, on a separate pass, so that we can overlay photographic elements on top of this if we need to bring up the realism if this is a real photoreal matte painting. If you're doing concept sketching, this is also great. You throw it in, you light it, render quickly, throw it in your scene, paint on top of it if you need to, and you're good to go. So a lot of uses for it, very powerful. And if you had even like a forest scene, we can maybe this is a topic for another tutorial using Forest Pack, pretty much an instancer that distributes geo on top of surfaces and you can create forests or scatter rocks, things like that. So a lot of advantages, the biggest being lighting. All right, let's jump into the next step.